You know, every time you flip a light switch, you're plugging into this huge invisible network, and you're just trusting it'll work. But our power grid is actually under constant threat. So, what's really keeping the lights on when things go wrong? When something breaks on the power grid, we're not talking about a little spark. No, this is a violent, sudden release of a massive amount of energy. We're talking thousands of amps going where they're not supposed to. And the result? It can be absolutely catastrophic, destroying millions of dollars of equipment in literally the blink of an eye. So, with that kind of destructive force just waiting to be unleashed, how does one single failure not trigger a massive chain reaction? What's the secret weapon, the line of defense that stops one little problem from turning into a city-wide blackout? To really get it, let's first appreciate the scale of the problem. Our power grid is this incredibly complex and, honestly, a surprisingly vulnerable machine.
A fault is really just a catch-all term for anything that messes up the normal flow of electricity. And sure, you might picture a huge, dramatic lightning strike, but most of the time, it's way more ordinary than that. Things like tree branches falling on lines, a squirrel getting a little too curious, or even just old equipment finally giving out, this kind of stuff is happening constantly.
But here's the thing. A single, isolated problem isn't the real danger. The absolute nightmare scenario for grid operators is what's called a cascading failure. That's where one problem triggers another, which triggers another and another, until the whole system just collapses under the strain. Luckily for all of us, the grid has a built-in, super high-speed defense system that's working 24/7 to stop exactly that from happening. Think of them as the grid's silent, unseen guardians. This system is called protective relaying. And really, the best way to think about it is like the grid has its own nervous system. It is constantly monitoring the flow of power, and the split second it senses something is wrong, kind of like when you touch a hot stove, it automatically reacts to isolate the problem and protect the rest of the system. And this all happens ridiculously fast, and it boils down to a really simple three-step process. First, it has to sense that there's a dangerous condition. Second, it has to decide on the right way to handle it. And finally, it has to act, to physically disconnect the problem from the rest of the grid. Okay, so let's dig into that first step. How on earth does a machine sense or see completely invisible forces like voltage and current? Well, a protective relay is a pretty sensitive piece of electronics. You can't just wire it directly into a high-voltage line that's carrying thousands of amps. It would just vaporize instantly. So the system needs a really clever and safe way to get an accurate reading of what's happening on those big power lines. And that's where instrument transformers come into play. If the relays are the brain of the nervous system, these are the eyes and ears. Their entire job is to create a safe, perfectly scaled down replica of those dangerously high currents and voltages, so the relays can analyze them without getting fried. For example, this is a current transformer, or CT for short. That really thick bar running through the middle is carrying all the main power. The coils wrapped around it create a tiny proportional current that is a perfect mirror of the thousands of amps on that main line. It's a brilliantly simple solution to a very big problem. So now the system can see the problem, but just seeing it isn't enough, not even close. It has to react with incredible speed and absolute precision. It's a constant race against disaster. Just think about this for a second. The blink of an eye takes about 300 to 400 milliseconds, but catastrophic, unfixable damage to major grid equipment can happen in under 200 milliseconds. That is the entire window of time the protection system has to sense the problem, decide what to do, and act. There is absolutely zero room for error. So to succeed when the stakes are that high, the whole system is built on three core principles. It has to have speed, it needs selectivity, and it must have reliability. Now, speed is pretty self-explanatory, but selectivity, that's where the real intelligence of the system shines. It's not about just shutting everything down in a panic. No, it's about acting like a surgeon and precisely removing only the broken part of the grid while keeping the lights on for everyone else. The way this works is the grid is actually divided up into thousands of overlapping zones of protection. Each zone is watched over by its own set of relays, so when a fault happens, only the relays for that one specific zone react. They open the circuit breakers right next to the problem, containing it instantly without affecting any of the other healthy zones. So after all this engineering deep dive, why does any of this invisible system actually matter? Well, it's the reason you can trust the power you use every single day. All of this incredibly complex engineering is happening in the background all the time, completely unseen. But what does it actually mean for us in our day-to-day lives?
Well, it means less damage to the super expensive equipment that makes up the grid, and that helps keep our costs down. It means fewer power outages and a much more stable, reliable supply of electricity. It even improves the quality of the power we get. And maybe most importantly, it dramatically improves safety, both for the public and for the workers who have to maintain this incredible system.
This hidden system of protective relays is the real reason our modern electrical world is so stable. It's a masterpiece of engineering we all completely depend on. But as we start to electrify everything, from our cars to our homes, the big question is, how will these silent guardians have to evolve to protect our future?